Hello lovely people out there in the chess world, it's Anna here with this week's Middlegame strategy with a topic that you might know already from Chess24, prophylaxis or prophylactic thinking. But before we begin with the lesson, let me tell you some good news. Our video series, our brand new video series with Sopiko Gormishvili is out. So you might have seen this on Chess24. Let me bring up the website. That we've already had a series about Magnus Carlsen. And that was the young Magnus. I hope that you can see right now what I'm seeing. So here on Chess24, chess24.com, you go to Learn, Video Series, and there you will see this brand new video series, Magnus Carlsen's Rise to the Top 10. This is actually a Magnus trilogy that we have recorded with Sopiko. We are actually still recording the third part. So the first part was the... let me just change the language to English so you see only the English videos. There it is, young Magnus Carlsen. That's the first part of our Magnus trilogy, and then right now the part 2 has just come out, and it's a really nice series in a sense that Magnus Carlsen himself helped us by recommending some of his favorite games that he played in that period of time after becoming a grandmaster and till the moment he became the number 1 on the rating list. So still not the world champion, but the best by rating in the world. Some amazing games, some really nice positional pawn sacrifices, a beautiful rook endgame, and of course also there are attacking dynamic games as well that Sopiko loved. I prefer the strategic ones, but anyway, really instructive games. So check that video series out if you're a premium. If not, you can purchase it. And also, if we are already here, you definitely know this guy here, the blonde one on the left. Jan Gustafsson recorded an incredible video series with Grandmaster Artur Yusupov, the renowned trainer. He used to be world number 3, if I'm correct, and he did a video series on our today's topic. So prophylactic thinking, there is already a video series on this topic on Chess24. You should definitely study that video series. I'm only bringing up the topic because I love prophylaxis. I really like preventing the opponent's plans. So we will discuss it today, but only for one session, because for the rest of the time, if you want to study this topic in depth, you already have a video series about it by Artur Yusupov and Jan Gustafsson on Chess24. Let me bring back the camera and we will begin with the board. Actually, I think we already need a chessboard. So there we go. This is a game you already know. Before you think that I forgot that I have already taught something about this position, we have had like 4 sessions about the opposite side castling, I think. And we learned a lot about how to attack the opponent's king, how we should be faster, how we need to sometimes sacrifice a pawn or 2 for the initiative. But maybe you have noticed also that we did not only learn about how to attack when there's opposite side castling, but we also learned already some things about prophylaxis. So let's just revise this game a little bit, because there were moments in this game where you already found moves that were prophylactic. So this is a Morozevich Alexeyev game, you can see it there. And this position, it is white to move, and we were discussing in the show whether h4 or g5 is the best move in this position. And what we learned from this game is that if you go h4, saying that all you want to do is push the g-pawn, push the h-pawn, well, that's the correct plan, but not the correct way of carrying the plan out. So you need to push first the g-pawn, because if you don't play g5, h4 is a mistake here, because black can counterattack in the center. Remember that the center is really important. You need to control it. So d5 here is a very good move, and if we want to capture it, black will take with the knight. We cannot take this knight because of the mate on c2. So wow, this position is already better for black. This easy, one mistake and that position starts collapsing. So here it was very, very important to know what the opponent was planning. He is threatening d5, so we had to prevent it by playing g5 first and then h4. And this is the moment where I think we should already start discussing a bit the concept of prophylaxis. So I really like actually what Artur Yusupov said about it, because He said, prophylactic thinking is rather simple. You just need to ask the right question from time to time. And that is, what does my opponent want? So if in this position we ask the right question, which is, what does my opponent want? We realize that he is threatening d5. So if we know what the threat is, we can prevent it. So prophylaxis is about prevention, and it's about getting ahead of the opponent's plan. It's about getting ready for something, but it's not a passive defensive move. So also in the video series that Artur Yusupov recorded, you will see he explains it very well. What's the difference between defense and prophylaxis? He says that defensive moves can be ugly, but prophylactic moves are beautiful. So when there's prophylaxis, it's usually not just about preventing something, not just about getting ready for something, but it's also a move that improves your position. And defensive moves are normally, well, it can be, of course, active defense. I'm not talking about that, but sometimes defensive moves are rather ugly and passive. Just imagine that if you see a very cloudy sky before you go out, you grab an umbrella. That could be prophylaxis. But if you're already out and it's raining, well, you can try to protect your head. You might put your jacket on your head. That's not prophylaxis anymore. I hope that this comparison helped you understand it, but I'm really recommending the video series because it's very well explained there, so you don't need any better teacher than Grandmaster Artur Yusupov. Let's see why we learned that. So here g5, yeah, we prevented d5, well done. And in this position, once again we made a prophylactic move, which was king b1. And I told you that when we castle queenside, whether it's white or black, doesn't matter, but many times you will use one tempo to move the king to b1 or b8, simply because it's safer there. So king b1 is a prophylactic move as well. There was no concrete threat now against the king, but it's just simply safer on b1, so you want to have it there, and you improve the king's position because it's better on b1. You get out of this semi-open c-file, and you prevent things like sometimes when the queen is on a5, it wants to threaten a check on a1, so it's coming out of the c-file, also protecting the a-file. It's just better on b1 normally. That was a prophylactic move too. And after a6, h4, queen c6, in this position, we saw that, well, we could start with h5, and after b5, well, you better ask the question, what is the threat of the opponent? He wants to push b4, and we cannot move the knight because the c2 pawn would be hanging. So that's pretty easy to see. And, oh, I already clicked on the move. Sorry, guys, I'm messing things up. What I wanted to show you is that after b5, here, sorry, without queen c6, oh, I've already showed you the right move, but I believe that you remember it anyway. So it's rook h2, what happened in the game of Morozevich, and it's a beautiful move because, yes, we are defending, so it could be a defensive move, but I would rather call it a prophylactic move because the rook is really nice on h2, it's protecting the c2 pawn, and at the same time it's supporting our pawn storm on the king side. So what happened in the game later was a position like this. The rook is brilliant on h2, it's protecting the king, and at the same time is helping those pawns, the h and g pawns, march ahead and win the game. This is what we have already learned. So let's bring up two new games, and one of them will be, well, a player that I believe is or has been one of the best in prophylactic thinking, Anatoly Karpov, the 12th world champion. Actually, he had his birthday on Monday, I believe, this week. He turned 65, so happy birthday, Anatoly Karpov. We are going to see one of his victories against Garry Kasparov. Of course, they had played many games against each other. This is game 27 from the first world championship match in 1984. Let's see the opening very quickly, and then you will have to think like Karpov. So just remember that we will want to ask the right question, and we will want to make moves that improve our position, not only prevent the opponent's plan in a passive way, but we want to improve our position and at the same time restrict the opponent's options. So this is a queen's gambit declined, not played that much these days anymore, but it used to be quite popular back then, and all I want is that we reach this position. because this will be the first moment where you need to think. So Kasparov has just played knight d7, and I guess there's an obvious threat. So just let me know very quickly, what is his threat and what shall we do about it? What would you play here with white if you were Anatoly Karpov? Let me bring up the time to think. That was really quick, and yes, of course, the answer is c6. Maybe it wasn't a very difficult question, but you do need to answer it in the correct way. So c6 is the best move in this position because black wants to capture our pawn. He will capture it. We cannot protect it. So let's give it to him in the best possible way for us. Let's distract that pawn structure as well, because if you see this position and compare it to, for instance, playing rook fd1 in this position, letting the opponent capture the pawn on c5. Now in this position we have these ugly pawns, the a2 and c3 pawn, isolated on the queen side, while black has a very healthy pawn structure, a7 and b7, and this knight on c5 is very annoying because it's an outpost for the knight. We cannot kick the knight away from c5, so here I really prefer black's position. Not that we are lost, of course, with white, maybe it's even equal, but just if you can give the pawn back in the best possible way for you and not in the best possible way for the opponent. So c6 is the best move, and this position actually is already, well, nowadays it's theory. There have been many games played in this position after the Karpov-Kasparov game, and c6 is in every game. So of course it's now normal to play c6, but somebody had to play it first. c6, b takes, and now rook a b1 I think is very logical because that's an open file. We want to improve our rook. There's no bishop b7 ever, and we are enjoying this open file. But now I think what will be a bit more difficult to understand is, well, first of all, after knight b6, you have to choose on which diagonal to keep the bishop. Would you go to b3 or to d3 or e2? Yeah, I give you those three options. Where would you retreat with the bishop? This is not about prophylaxis, but simply strategy. So where do you think the bishop should be, on which diagonal? Time to think. Well, guys, I've given you three options and f3 in all those three moves mentioned in the chat. Yeah, I know it's not easy, but only one of these moves, well, one is the very best. That's what Karpov played, of course, and the other two are not that good. Well, okay, maybe... No, it's not so easy to make a difference between the three, but one is clearly not in the plan. So, we want to keep the bishop on the a6 f1 diagonal. The reason is simple, actually. And yeah, that has to do something with prophylaxis, because first of all, this bishop is not doing much on this diagonal currently. I mean, it's nice, but at the same time, it's biting this e6 pawn that's very well protected. That's not really a diagonal for the bishop. Secondly, if we move it away from this diagonal, actually it's not that much about that the bishop would be bad here. I wouldn't mind the bishop there if I had more pawns, if I had a pawn here, for instance. But in this position, after having retreated the bishop from the a6 f1 diagonal, now who can have that diagonal? The opponent. Bishop a6 would be a very annoying move, not only because it wins the tempo, so he develops his bishop with a tempo. That's annoying, but even more annoying is that there's a weak square on c4. Yes, we don't have a b pawn, yes, we don't have a d pawn, so c4 is an outpost. He could place his bishop there, for instance, he could go there with the knight, even if not immediately, because we might enter on the d file. This position is good for black because he is heading to this c4 outpost. He will place the rooks here, and he will have this c4 square. So when you see this pawn structure, I know this pawn structure is not that usual. Maybe in your games you don't have this a2, c3 pawn structure, but when you have this pawn structure, there are holes in there. There's this c4 square, which is an outpost for the opponent. Of course, black has the same pawn structure, so if we could have our knight on c5, I would love that. That's an outpost for our pieces, but we are pretty far from placing a knight on c5, and black is pretty close to placing his knight on c4. So allowing bishop a6 is not a losing move. These are very tiny details, so don't think that here white's position is horrible. No, simply we are allowing him something that favors him. The bishop on a6 is good because of the reasons I have mentioned. So let's not allow bishop a6 and make a move that keeps this diagonal. And now that we know that we want to keep the bishop there, we need to choose between bishop d3 and bishop e2. Many of you have mentioned that you would play bishop b3 because you want to keep the d file for the rook. Good thinking. So yeah, bishop d3 is not the best because it obstructs the d file, and it will also be attacked once black plays rook d8. So maybe it looks passive, but the best move in this position after knight b6 is bishop e2. And the funny thing about bishops is that whether it's on c4 or, well, here we cannot place it on b5 or a6. Imagine it's not hanging there, just for a moment, imagine it. Sometimes it's almost the same to have it on e2, on f1, as having it on b5, a6, c4. Sometimes, not always, of course. It's because the bishops are long-range pieces. So this bishop from e2 can have the same power from e2 than it would have from c4. Yes, from c4 it had two diagonals. That's an advantage. But once you move it to b3, it has less squares. It has only these two here, one here, and these backwards. So sometimes I know that it looks passive, but just always remember that bishops are long-range pieces, so the bishop will have a diagonal, and as many of you have said, the c6 pawn is weak, so in the future it would be really nice to have our bishop on f3. So thumbs up for everybody who have mentioned that bishop e2 is also good, because in the future we might play bishop f3 attacking this c6 pawn. Good job, guys. I think we discussed this bishop e2 move quite in detail. c5 was played in the game, and now this is a moment where I would like you to imagine once again that you are Karpov. You need to find what Karpov played in this position. I shall add that it won't be the most natural looking move in the position. Try to think where you might have a weakness in your position. Try to anticipate a possible future attack against your weaknesses, against a weakness in your position, and get ready for it before it's being attacked. That's what Karpov would do in this position. Improve his position in a way that it already anticipates a future threat of the opponent. What could that be? It's being mysterious, I know, but try to guess it and tell me what would be the natural move here and what would be the Karpovian move. think I will reveal the move because it's almost impossible to guess it. Sorry guys that I asked it. No, actually I'm not sorry, because I wouldn't have guessed it either. It's such a move. It's just the typical move that is too deep to understand. So the move that Karpov played in this position is Rook FC1. I give you a moment to try to understand it, because even now that I have seen the game like 3 times and analyzed it with the engine as well, I still get surprised that he has played Rook FC1 actually. So you see an open file, the D file. You would place a rook there, I would place a rook there, or maybe I would think Rook FD1 or Knight E5. I think these would be my 2 main candidates in this position, my move candidates. So there's nothing wrong with these moves. Don't feel bad if you have said these moves. I would have played them. I think many other players, many other title players would have played Knight E5 or Rook FD1. But we are not Karpov. Karpov plays Rook FC1 in this position. And he just says that, okay, I need to move the rook in order to bring the king. He wants to bring the king closer. But he says, well, I believe he says, I haven't read it. I don't know what actually he believes about this position, but I think his reasoning is that the D file is not as useful as it seems. Let me show you a variation, a possible variation to demonstrate that the D file is not that important. So if we go Rook FD1, let's say Bishop B7, and we really want to use the D file, so we say Rook, well, okay, King F1 first, we could play, but instead of King F1, because King F1 is a good move, Rook FD1, King F1, those are good moves, but if we really want to make use of the D file, we say Rook FD1, Rook D6, we're gonna double rooks, we have the D file, we are happy. After Rook FD8 and doubling rooks, we will suddenly get surprised that Black exchanges on D6, plays Bishop D5, and our rook is sort of trapped on D6. Yeah, Black is threatening to play King F8, King E7 and capture the rook. And even if somehow we manage to survive, get the rook out of there, I don't know what move, C4, I guess we have to sacrifice something in order to get the rook out of D6. This position looks pretty bad. The D5 bishop not only closes the rook but also threatens to capture on A2. Black can jump to A4. I have drawn already those arrows, so now you see that those pawns are really weak. The A2 pawn, the C3 pawn, and it is Black who is attacking those pawns. Black has almost the same pawn structure. It's almost identical, but we as White are not even close to attacking the C5 pawn or the A7 pawn. So this position, besides those hanging pawns and having this trapped rook on D6, pretty horrible. It is pretty horrible. It doesn't mean that Rook FD1 is bad. It is a good move. Simply it means that we cannot do much about the D file. We always learn that we should place the rooks on open files, and I think 97% of the cases you should do that. But there's this 3%, I've just made up the statistics, there's this 3% where you have a different move. You have a move that is not occupying the open file, because the open file is not so useful here. So let's just have once again a look at this position. After Bishop B7, we cannot go to D8, we cannot go to D7, we cannot go to D5. The only available square, why am I drawing that in green? Red, we cannot go there. We can go only to the D6 square, and as we have seen it, not King F1. King F1 is the good move. I'm messing up with the mouse, clicking here and there. So all I want to say is that placing the rook on D6 doesn't mean anything. First of all, we are not threatening anything. Secondly, the rook will be bad on D6 because it's kinda trapped. So what we should learn from this position is not that we should make weird moves. I really think that if you believe Rook FD1 is the good move, play it. If you want to play here Knight E5, play it. All those moves are great. Just play the move that you like, play the move that you think will be your plan. Always have a plan. It's important to have a plan, and then follow your plan. Follow how you want to place your pieces. But if we want to learn why rook fc1, we should see the rest of the moves in the game. So yes, Karpov wants to bring his king. He wants to place the rook in a place which is more useful than having it on f1. He says that the d file is not so important, and he also says, I believe, that the c3 pawn is weak. So he wants to prevent any kinds of knight a4 jumps, any kinds of knight d5 jumps, threatening the pawn. And it might seem to be passive that we have the rook on c1 protecting a pawn, but it's just temporary. He wants to have his pawn safe before he starts attacking the opponent's pawn on c5. So we will see that he places the rook on c1 before he starts attacking the opponent's pawns. Bishop b7 was played in the game, king f1, he's bringing the king closer. This is almost an endgame, this is like between middle game and endgame. So we need the king, there are no queens on the board. Bishop d5, and now once again you need to think, what would Karpov play? And don't think that he makes passive moves because rook c1 looks passive. No, it's not passive because it improved his position. So once again, first of all, we should detect the threat, which is pretty easy. Bishop takes a2. Once we know the threat, we should see how to prevent it, how to avoid a loss of a pawn. So what would you play here? Try to be Karpov and not weaken your structure. I've seen the correct answer and it wasn't an easy one. Once again, you had to discover a move that is not the most natural looking, so we are not playing a3. That would be just weakening the pawn structure, and Karpov would always avoid it if he can. He also did not play rook b2 because that's not bad, but too passive, I guess, because after knight a4, once again, you need to do something about that rook, so you will end up being quite passive. Let's admit that it's passive. And c4 is a move that, yes, protects the a2 pawn, but at the same time obstructs the bishop. So he doesn't want to close the bishop's diagonal with c4 unless it's necessary. And there is a move which doesn't close the bishop, it doesn't lose the pawn, it doesn't push the pawn, and it doesn't protect it with moves like rook b2 or rook c2. And that move is what Kalashnikov has found, and Simba7 has agreed with him. So you guys, brilliant job. Rook b5 is the correct move. And yeah, you might tell me, Anna, we had to protect the pawn and this move doesn't protect the pawn. Well, sometimes counterattack is the best defense, so we don't protect the pawn on a2. Instead of protecting the pawn, we attack the opponent's pawn. So yes, in case of bishop a2, we could capture here, But instead of capturing, we have an even better move. After rook b5, bishop takes a2 would be a horrible blunder, actually. Similar to the rook d6 we have seen before. c4, now really c4 traps the bishop. Yes, it's beautiful. So bishop d5. Black is threatening to capture on a2 because, well, it's hanging, and secondly, when he captures on a2, our rook is hanging. So Karpov doesn't only see that his pawn is hanging, but he sees the reasoning that the pawn can be captured because his rook on b1 would be hanging. He anticipates this threat by playing rook b5, threatening the opponent's pawn and at the same time moving the rook away from b1. So in case of bishop takes a2, he can simply trap the bishop with c4. That's brilliant, isn't it? Simple and brilliant at the same time. So rook b5 attacks the pawn, prevents bishop takes a2, and also Kalashnikov has added that rook b5 with the idea of playing rook a5 in the future, and that's exactly what happened in the game, because after knight d7, rook a5. This is such a nice position for the rook here, because as you can see from the arrows, I need to fix my pronunciation, I think, arrows, well, I guess you know what I mean. The rook on a5 is protecting the a2 pawn, attacking the c5 pawn, attacking the a7 pawn. So attacking, defending at the same time, and it's an active piece. It might look weird that we have a rook on a5 and we don't have it on b2. On b2 it would be like a natural looking rook. It's better now on a5. It is a brilliant rook maneuver. Rook b5 to play rook a5, and that's the most ideal square you could have for the rook in this position. I could only imagine one square that's even better, maybe taking this rook from c1 and landing it on c7. So one rook on a5, another rook on c7. I think that position would be completely winning for white, because with such active rooks, I don't think that black's position could be held. So yeah, Anna, stop dreaming, we cannot fly with the rook. Still, in endgames, and we are very close to an endgame, you should think about not only what shall I do in this move, then what's next, not only by move calculation, but imagining where would you like to have your pieces. So Karpov knew that he wanted to have his rook on a5, and that's why he plays rook b5 and then rook a5. He also knows that if we exchange the rooks, he will want to have his king on a6, for instance. So depending on the position, you should be able to imagine where each piece would be in its best. So don't just calculate move by move. Whenever it's a strategic position, it's a lot better when you have this vision of, I would like to have a rook on a5, I wish I could have my other rook on c7. When we exchange rooks, I will activate my king so that it's on d6 or on a6 or on b5, anywhere close to black's pawns. These are the kind of thoughts that will help you to actually carry out those plans. So just try to think more abstract in strategic positions. I think that's a very good tip. When you see a weakness, try to see how to maneuver your knight there. When you see a weak pawn, try to imagine how could you focus all your pieces' strengths against that pawn. So how could we all attack this a7 pawn? Well, doubling rooks on the a file, having the rook on c7. I don't know how we get to c7, but still, I wish I could have my rook on c7. And I don't know if I can ever get to play rook b1, rook b3, rook a3. The b3 square is protected, but still, it's good to know that maybe in the future, after pushing c4, playing rook c3, and then rook a3, I'm attacking the a7 pawn. So knowing what you want to reach will get you actually to find the solution and see how to carry those ideas out. Let's see what happened in the game, because I talk a lot. Rook a5, rook fb8, and here, this is already the moment where Karpov played. I will not tell you actually, you will tell me. What does black want with his rook fb8 move? What is his threat? And what shall we do about it? Try to think like Karpov. Try to prevent the opponent's active play. have seen the correct move, and once again, I believe it was Kalashnikov who said it first. Kalashnikov, you are on fire today. c4. This is a move that we have mentioned before, and I said Karpov wouldn't play it because it would block the bishop's diagonal. But in this position, the story is different. We already have a rook on a5, which is attacking the pawn on c5, and we want to keep this knight protecting the pawn forever. We don't want this knight to go and jump around. We don't want this knight to be active. So in order to keep black's pieces as passive as possible, we need to fix the weakness. So the c5 pawn is weak and we need to fix it. Many of you have said, why not c4 as black? Yes, black could have played c4, but just look at this position. Even after c4, the pawn is weak. Now it's not on c5, it's on c4. That's why Karpov didn't want to prevent this move, because the pawn is still weak. It's fixed now. It's fixed because of our pawn on c3. And you can see that we have light square bishops on the board. So normally when you have light square bishops, it's not a good idea to fix the pawns on light squares, because it means that for white it is a target, white is attacking the pawn, while black cannot attack our pawn, it's in a different color. Normally when there's only one bishop on the board, try to push your pawns in a way that they are not on the same color as the bishops, so the opponent's pawns will be on the same color if you fix them. Hope that's easy to understand from what is drawn. I was trying to draw it, and that's the reason why he did not prevent c4, but he doesn't want to allow c4 forever, because at some point black could really activate his pieces by pushing c4 and jumping with the knight around. If the knight was on e4, it would be attacking our pawn as well, it would be an active piece, all those things. So we love the rook on a5, we love that the pawn would be hanging on c5, it is a weak pawn, and we fix it with c4. So why not c4 b4? Because in the position where black plays bishop d5, we could have played c4. And many of you have said c4, not a bad move, but there's a difference. Tiny little details, but there is a difference. Let's see what's the difference. We, you, he, she, anybody, if they play c4, if the move is c4 in this position, black can go bishop c6 and it prevents rook b5. Yes, we can continue with the initiative playing knight e5, but after bishop a4, he still doesn't allow rook b5, and if bishop f3, rook a c8, this position is close to equal. White has a somewhat better position, very similar structure, but very similar, almost the same structure. The knight is really nice on e5, of course, but we could not activate the rooks. We cannot go rook b5, we cannot play rook d1, so this bishop on a4 is pretty annoying. Perhaps the best move in this position is to exchange this bishop, because it's annoying that it prevents rook b5, it prevents rook b3, it prevents rook d1. All those light squares are controlled by the bishop. So if we play rook b5 first, black has to protect it, then we go rook a5. What has changed? We have already managed to carry out the maneuver rook b5, rook a5. Next move, we're gonna go c4, fix the pawn on c5, win a tempo. Well, it would have been a tempo before too, and now we don't care anymore if he goes to if he goes to c6 with the bishop, because our rook is already great on a5. We don't need the b5 square anymore. We have this beautiful rook on a5. So c4 is a very good move. It fixes the pawn, the weakness on c5. Yes, we put our pawn on a square where it's blocking our bishop. But don't worry, Karpov will find another diagonal for the bishop. So he will not keep his bishop on e2 forever. He will manage to find another diagonal for the bishop. And yes, it's on a light square. I told you that when we have bishops, try to put your pawns on the opposite color. So in this position, we would rather have our pawn on dark square and the opponent's pawn on light square, but that's in general. And there are more pieces on the board, so that would be only in a bishop endgame, where there's one single bishop. And in other positions, you also need to take into account that you have this rook on a5, which is attacking the pawn on c5. So why not to fix the pawn on c5? We should play c4 and then find a new diagonal for the bishop in order to activate it. c4 was also played for another reason, and that reason is Kasparov has played rook fb8, and Kasparov wants to play active. So you, as the opponent of Kasparov, should prevent Kasparov's idea. How to play prophylactic here? We've just played c4. That was number one move in the prophylactic plan that Karpov had in this position. What was the number two move in his plan? Well done, guys! So many right solutions, so many of you saying knight e1. I'm so proud of you, because this move is once again not the most natural in the position. But if you understand what you need to prevent and then you see how to prevent it in a way that is actually favoring you, then you find the move knight e1, because knight e1, if we just look at the move in itself, the knight on e1 is bad. We all know that. But the knight will not stay on e1, the knight goes to e1, so that after rook b2, we have knight d3. And now you really understand that this knight on d3 is amazing. Kicks out the rook and attacks the weak pawn on c5. Okay, I've just blundered bishop takes g2. Careful about tactics, because yes, you might see some beautiful strategic idea, like I've seen this knight d3 and I've blundered bishop takes g2. So you always need to check if there's any tactical motive that might not let your plan to be carried out. So even here, I would try to see if I can trap this rook on e2, but no, I'm afraid we cannot. So that means after rook b2, knight d3 is not the best. But now we know why. Now we know why I blundered. Knight d3 is the move we want to play, but we need to prevent, once again, black's plans. So c4, knight e1 are all part of a prophylactic plan. This prophylactic thinking, always preventing the opponent's ideas. But we cannot play knight d3 right now because of the bishop takes g2 tactical motive. How to prevent bishop takes g2? How can we carry out the move knight d3? I'll let you tell me that. That was really quick. f3, of course, very good move. Congratulations everyone here. f3 of course is the right move, and then knight d3. Don't blunder like I did. If you make moves without thinking, it might happen to you. So yes, the correct plan was c4, knight e1, knight d3, but you always need to check by calculation how can you carry it out. Never blunder. The rook on b2 is very dangerous, so now the king is overloaded. It has to protect the e2 bishop and the g2 pawn if we jump away with the knight. So f3, very good move, and knight d3 next move. The rook will be hanging, the pawn on c5 will be hanging. This is not a good position at all for black. So brilliant move, knight e1. And I've seen in the chat that you guys compared it to Anderson's game. There's this Ulf Anderson game that we analyzed with Sopikov. Very good. It is actually a very similar maneuver. Looks passive, but once you understand the idea, knight e1, knight d3, it's rather simple, isn't it simple? Knight e1, very good move. And since rook b2 is a bad move here, there's no point of playing rook b2 anymore. Kasparov played rook b4. And now once again, I think you already feel how Karpov plays, so the right question, what does my opponent want? And the right answer is, and then how to prevent it. Wow, I'm really impressed. I know that when we ask questions and you expect a move like this, it might be easier to find it, but still, you guys are brilliant. You have just found yet another Karpovian move, bishop d1, of course, because black wants to play rook a4. Our rook on a5 is our best piece. Can we give it up? Can we let this rook be traded? No. Never. That's the best soldier in our army, if we can call rooks soldiers, but anyway, you know what I mean. That's the best piece in this position. We don't allow the opponent exchange it. How can we prevent rook a4? By playing bishop d1, and that's once again a move that might look passive, but if you understand that first of all, you are preventing the opponent's idea. By preventing the opponent's idea, you will still and forever have this rook on a5. That's a big plus. So keeping the rook on a5 means that you should play bishop d1. So yes, it's a passive looking move which prevents a very good idea for black. That means we will have the rook on a5. And if you remember that when we push c4, in that very position, I was already saying that Karpov will not keep his bishop on e2. Don't worry, he will find a new diagonal for the bishop. Remember that I said something like that? Well, just look what happened a few moves later. Bishop d1, preventing rook a4 and already searching for another diagonal for the bishop. Maybe we cannot play bishop a4 in the future. Oh my. Yeah, or bishop c2 might be stupid, but still, bishop d1, we might go to b3 if it's necessary to protect the pawn on c4. Not the most active, but it's for the moment. And we have a very active rook on a5 thanks to this bishop move. So the bishop is not worse on d1 than how it was on e2. Don't feel bad about playing bishop d1. It's just as good as it was on e2, or even better. We have more squares. How many squares we have from d1? Just let's see. Quickly, I will... Ooh, 7. And when the bishop was on e2, we had 5. I know it is childish, but sometimes by calculating or counting how many squares the piece can move to, you might see that, hey, on d1, it's actually more active than how it was on e2. Weird, but it's true. Bishop d1, very good move. And after rook b7, once again, it's your turn to think. Think about what would be the best move here. What's the move that you would love to play? I think that's a better question. So what is the move that we wish we could play here? We would love to play it because it looks just so strong. and see if the opponent has any good response to that move. I wonder if you can guess what I mean, because once again it's not so simple. I'm pretty impressed because it was very difficult to guess the move, and even like this, some of you have said it. Actually, f3 was suggested in the chat. Well done! Well done! f3 is what Karpov played. You play like a world champion. f3. The most natural, the best looking move in this position, of course, is knight d3. Why not knight d3? Let's see. We go knight d3, we want to grab the pawn. This was all our plan, wasn't it? It is our plan, and this is what we want to do. But after knight d3, bishop e4 is annoying. Why is it annoying? We will capture the pawn, and after rook takes c5, rook b2, we are a pawn up. But black's rook is on the second rank, attacking the pawn on a2, the bishop will come to d3, then he will also bring his other rook, and we are playing against Kasparov. Would you ever let Kasparov have an active position for just the price of a pawn? This position, if you analyze it with the engine, is 0-0-0, I believe, at least according to my engine, which means that the pawn is more than compensated. So here black is at least doing as good as white, but I would be just really scared of allowing my opponent having such active pieces that compensate a lot for the pawn. So yeah, this is definitely something that Karpov wanted to prevent. Remember that in positions where everything is about weaknesses, maneuvers, so strategy, in one word, you don't need to rush. There's no need to rush playing knight d3. If you see that bishop e4 will lead to a complicated position. So even if it was the best move in the position, you don't have to go for it if you don't like the outcome of that unclear position with the rook on b2. What you can do is to prevent bishop e4 first and then go for knight d3. And that's why f3 is the right move here. f3, yes, I know. After f3, this position is already quite a good advantage, quite a big advantage for white. And it's difficult to believe because, first of all, if you look at the pawn structure, it's almost identical. We have A and C pawns and then E, F, G, H. With slight differences, they are almost on the same squares even. We have the same pieces, material equality. And all the white pieces, almost all the white pieces are on the back rank. Rook c1, bishop d1, knight e1 and a king on f1. Our only active piece is the rook on a5. That's how it looks. That is the only active piece. But this position is just very close to be winning for white because yes, the knight is on e1, but it's about to jump to d3. Yes, the bishop is on d1, but it was preventing rook a4 and it might go to b3 or to another diagonal. It will be activated. And the rook on c1 is very useful because it was preventing all those captures on c4. Remember the position where black plays rook b4, threatening rook a4? Imagine we did not have the rook on c1. We were sort of laughing at the move rook fc1 when it was played. But Karpov foresees everything. He knew that at some point in the game he would need the rook on c1, and in this position we can only play bishop d1 because our rook is protecting the c-pawn. Okay, I don't know if he saw exactly this position coming, but he knew that there will be positions, that there will be variations where the rook will be useful on c1. He knew it. He just feels it. So the position we have right now on the board is after f3, an almost winning position for white, with all those pieces on the back rank, yes. But I already explained why, let's not repeat it. Rook d8 and now knight d3, of course, is already a good move, because we want to capture the pawn. That's simple. After g5, what do you think? Did Karpov take on c5? What happens if knight takes c5? Let's calculate it. Does black have any active counterplay after knight takes c5? And if he does, do you think that Karpov would allow it? Let me see your answer. You guys are good at being Karpov. At least saying that he did not capture the pawn, that is correct. g5 is not about any immediate threats, but black needs to create some kind of play. He needs to weaken something in white's position because everything is well protected. There's nothing to attack as black here. He is about to lose a pawn, so he should do something. In the future he might push g4, depending on where our king is, but g5 in general he wins space. He might push f5 or h5 or g4. He has to do something, so g5, that's the reason why he pushes g5. Mainly these g4 pushes can be annoying in some positions, but the main question here was not why g5, but why not knight takes c5. It's a good move, isn't it? We capture a pawn, and after rook takes c5, this bishop is hanging, so what could go wrong? Well, what can go wrong is that once again black has active counterplay and he can, hold your breath, sacrifice the piece. Rook b2, once again, because having the rooks on the second rank is sometimes so powerful that you can even give up a piece, at least in positions like this. Rook takes c6, the other rook comes to the second rank, and black has at least a draw. First, I didn't want to believe it, because I'm a piece up, and I have a c passed pawn. I was like, I give a check, I start advancing that pawn. What can go wrong? Well, check. So where do we go? Maybe to e1, but after rook takes g2, he's threatening mate with rook g1. Okay, so we have to go back. This is the first moment when you realize that, so if black wants to make a draw, he will just repeat. Rook gf2, if I go to e1, even worse. No, not even, he doesn't have to repeat. After rook takes h2, we are almost lost, if not completely lost. You have to give back the piece in order to prevent mate. So this is horrible. No, as white, you cannot try to escape from the checks. You have to be here on g1, then come back to f1. And this is at least a draw, because it is black who can decide whether he wants to do something else or keep on giving checks. He can give a check on f2 and then capture the pawn on a2. Of course, he always needs to see if white can escape from the checks and remain with the piece up, but as long as everything is calculated, as long as he has the rooks on the second rank, there's no way to escape from it. You can never place anything on c2 nor on e2 because of the rooks, and if it's the only piece that you can move is the king in order to prevent the rook g1, rook h1 mate ideas, then it's bad luck. It is at least a draw. So knight takes c5 is not a good move, because once again it allows black to activate his pieces. Then what? We wanted to capture this pawn so much and we cannot. The reason why we cannot capture the pawn is because black would have rook b2. So now that we are in this prophylactic thinking mode in our brain, we see the threat and we anticipate it. So we see the cloudy sky and we grab an umbrella. Before the rook gets to b2, we have already prevented it. We are not taking on c5 and the b2 square is protected. So it's like, why do we need to prevent rook b2? We need to prevent it because we want to capture the pawn. How to prevent it? By playing bishop b3. And I've seen that some of you guys have said it. Congratulations, bishop b3 once again looks like a move that, oh my, this bishop on b3, it's not active. It is like a huge pawn. It's just obstructed by our own pawns on c4 and a2. All it does is blocking the b file, but that is enough. All it does is to block the b file. That's all we need that's all we need right now in this position. We want to capture the pawn on c5. We want to prevent rook b2. So we place the bishop on b3 and then we capture the pawn on c5. Yeah, this is how Karpov thinks. This is how I wish I could always think. I love thinking like this. I love preventing the opponent's ideas, but this is a masterpiece. So this is prophylaxis on its highest level. Don't worry if you haven't guessed all the moves, because it's difficult. The only important thing here is to understand why he's doing it. And I think once we understand his moves, we'll learn a lot from this game, because we might think in our next game, what does the opponent want? And we don't only look at direct threats, we also look at plans. We see that maybe 3 moves later, maybe 5 moves later, the rook will want to go to b2, and I avoid it now on move 1. So that's prophylaxis. Bishop b3, and next move, we will capture the pawn. All I want to add is that if here black goes rook b6, for instance, what do you think? Would Karpov capture the pawn? I think it's already a question that you immediately say, no, I don't know why, but for sure no. Tell me why not knight takes c5 here? What could be black's plan after rook b6 if knight takes c5? What does he want to do? And if we know that, let's try to prevent it. Good job! All those little Karpovs out there in the world that you guys are becoming, because yes, we are not capturing the pawn. No, 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 no. If you see a hanging pawn, don't capture it. That's today's lesson. No, kidding. But if we capture the pawn now, still there is active counterplay for black. Knight takes c5, knight takes, rook takes. The point of rook b6 was to avoid that the bishop would be hanging after rook takes c5. So in a way, rook b6 is also a prophylactic move. It is a move that gets black ready for knight takes c5, and then there will be no hanging bishop on c6. So we see prophylactic moves from both sides. Of course, Kasparov also makes prophylactic moves. It's not just that Karpov is the only player in the world. Karpov is perhaps the best player in the world who plays in a prophylactic way, who used to play in a prophylactic way. But we see prophylactic moves in every game, basically. So even if you are an aggressive attacking player, you might play some prophylactic moves. Prophylactic moves appear, I believe, in every game. So there is always some kind of prevention. There's always some kind of getting ready for the opponent's idea. It's not something alien to discuss. Simply, we normally don't pay much attention to these moves because they are like this is a defensive move, oh, this is a passive move. No, this is just avoiding whatever the opponent wants. So he wants us to capture the pawn because he has protected the bishop, and now that we have captured the pawn, he will go rook d2, perhaps, or he will go rook a6. In both cases, we are a pawn up, and it's good. We have a good position. I'm not saying this is bad. What I'm saying is that if we could capture the pawn after having prevented this, that black can activate his rooks, that's better. So after rook b6, I'm pretty sure that Karpov would have played either king e2. Sorry, no, not here. I'm clicking here and there. Rook b6, I mean here. He could go king e2. And next move, knight takes c5, so there will never be a rook d2 coming. Prophylaxis. Or you can also play after rook b6, rook d1, the same idea. Maybe in this position I even preferred, because we are pinning the rook on d8, so after knight takes c5 he cannot even capture the knight. It's also something to have in mind. But both moves are good because both are against the opponent's plan. Many times this is... Okay, in this position, it's very much about prophylaxis and preventing the opponent's ideas, but you see that it's not bad to capture the pawn. Simply, it's like, do you want to allow your opponent have active play, or you want to suffocate him? You don't want to give him any activity. And Karpov was the kind of player, and is the kind of player, if he would come back to the board, of course, that he would never allow the opponent to anything active. If he can prevent it, he will go like a snake and slowly but firmly kill his opponent. I know it is tough, but it's beautiful at the same time on the chessboard. Not about snakes, I hate snakes, but on the chessboard this kind of play to me is really appealing, because it's like he's not doing anything special, at the same time he's doing something incredible. He has prevented active play by one of the most aggressive players. Garry Kasparov could not do anything in this game. He is losing this game without any chance. So there was this weak pawn on c5. He fixed it. White improved his pieces. He prevented all black's plans. And after g5, bishop b3, king f8. Rook b6 was not played in the game, but we have discussed that he would have definitely played king e2 or rook d1. Finally, we can grab the pawn. King f8, we capture the pawn because now the bishop is hanging on c6, so there's no rook d2. Wow, we made it. We are a pawn up. Yeah, and now we have to make like 40 or 50 more moves to win the game, but still, this is the beauty of strategic play. There's no mate, we are not winning a piece, we are just a pawn up, and we will win an endgame in 100 moves. This is how I like playing chess. Okay, the truth is that I also like giving mate, but I really love the strategic maneuvers, weaknesses, and it was just beautiful how he, first of all, played this rook c1 mysterious move, if you remember in the opening, in the middle game. Let me just go back there. And then we also see, of course, we will see how the game finished. But until this point is where you really need to remember what you should learn from this game. So rook c1 was the mysterious move, and is the second move of the engine. So the engine actually confirms that rook c1 is a good move, one of the best moves in the position. After that, what he did was bringing the king closer, and when his pawn was hanging, of course he did not think about moves like a3, because that means that what are those pawns doing? Like there's one on a3 and another on c3. No, this is a Karpov game, there's always harmony. So no a3 and no c4 here, because after c4, black will prevent rook b5. So after bishop d5, he played first rook b5, attacking the c5 pawn, and also setting a trap. If bishop takes a2, then c4 would have trapped the bishop. But rook b5 is not only about a trap, it's not only about attacking the c5 pawn, it's not a one-move thing. It's a long-term plan. His plan was to place the rook on a5. And here, in this position, I wanted to mention, I just didn't want to say it before, that if rook fc8 or rook ac8, any rook move to c8, it's true that after rook a5, maybe there's knight c4. So in this position, you might change your plan. Of course, we have to be flexible. Sometimes we need to alter our plans. The rook is still nice on b5, but maybe in this position it's better to go c4 immediately, so there will be no knight c4 jumps at all in the future. The bishop cannot go to c6, it has to go to e4, and now after knight d2 the bishop is hanging and we are threatening to jump to b3. So we are actually doing something similar than what happened in the game, but in a different way, with the rook on b5 and the knight not going to e1 d3, because with the bishop on e4 that's not something feasible. You don't want to go e1, because when it jumps to d3 it will be captured. Yeah, we might want to go d3, but you don't have to go this artistic. Just take it as simple as possible. If the bishop is on e4, knight d2 is a tempo, and then we go knight b3 and we capture the pawn. How useful this rook is on c1, because we will capture the c pawn and then we are supporting our brand new c passed pawn how it should be, with the rook on c1 and then pushing the c pawn. This rook c1 was amazing. So after rook b5, what happened in the game was knight d7, then placing the rook on a5. It's defending and attacking at the same time. It's an ideal place for the rook. And after rook b8, of course, he spotted this threat. c4, fixing the weakness on c5. And after bishop c6, black wants to play rook b2, so he goes knight e1, then wanting to jump to d3. And remember that in every line, even if you see the right maneuver, don't play the moves immediately like I did, because knight d3 is a blunder here. There's bishop takes g2. The bishop is hanging on e2. So to prevent it, prophylactic thinking, you should go f3 first and then knight d3. Our position is great. Instead, what happened in the game was knight e1, rook b4. What does black want? He wants to take our most beautiful piece in this position. He wants to capture, he wants to exchange the rook on a5. So we prevent it. We prevented everything in this game. Prophylactic thinking in every move, basically. This is how Karpov played. Bishop d1, and after rook b7, just remember that here we wanted to play knight d3, but after bishop e4, it would have been a mess. Black is active. Try to prevent this if you can. The c5 pawn is not going away. It's a weakness that is fixed, so it will be there even 30 moves later. Don't be in a rush capturing it, because black cannot do anything about its fall. It's gonna fall, whether it's a next move or in 10 moves, the c5 pawn will fall. f3, we are preparing knight d3. And after rook d8, knight d3, g5. g5 or any other move, but he would not capture the pawn immediately because he wants to prevent rook b2, so there's no knight takes c5 here. Well, you can play it, but why to do it? Let's not allow active counterplay. Let's play like Karpov and prevent everything possible. Bishop b3, we prevent a rook b2 that is a square that is protected. I have already said how beautiful it is that this bishop looks horrible on b3, but it's a very useful bishop. So bishop b3, all we want is to capture the c5 pawn. And let's see how he won this endgame, because I know this is a middle game show, but I believe that we can learn a lot from Karpov's technique. So this is an endgame that is winning. We are a pawn up. And this Karpov with the white pieces, so of course he knew how to win it. Kasparov would have won it too, of course, if they played the other color. Where, you know what I mean. They were the best players of that time. I believe that they are still the best players in the world. Adding a few more names from nowadays. Amazing players. There are so many great players in the chess world. But to me, Karpov, because his style is so appealing to me, I've always looked at him as one of the best world champions, at least for me. Kasparov too, of course, is amazing. I love Kasparov's games too. And of course, I love Magnus Carlsen's games. That's why we have a Magnus trilogy, Miss Strategy, Miss Tactics, Magnus trilogy. It has just come out. I said it at the beginning of the show that this is our new video series with Sopiko, so you can already learn from those Magnus games. That's why I didn't choose a Magnus game for today, because first of all, I love Karpov's games too, and Magnus's games. But there's a video series on Magnus Carlsen that I've done, so normally in my show you will see different games. I don't want to be repeating the same games. That would not be fair with you guys. So you see Carlsen's games there in the video series, and we will see other games in the show. But lot of talking and not many moves on the board. King e7 and rook d1. This is an endgame with a pawn up, so let's exchange pieces. Let's exchange the d6 rook. And now that we have exchanged it, we go back to a5 with the rook, because that's such a great square. Our rook is a lot more active than the black rook. We are a pawn up, so black doesn't have any chance to draw this game, at least not against such a strong player as Karpov. Here I just wanted to mention that of course there are many possibilities for white. Black wants to go g4, so that's something that you should have in mind, that he wants to create some kind of counterplay. That's why he pushed g5 some moves ago, so that later he would expand on the king side, push those pawns, create weaknesses, because imagine that this g2 pawn is exposed. It could drop. So in this position you either go g3 and after g4 f4, but I'm pretty sure that Karpov would not like to have those holes in his position. Even if this position is good, it is good, but there are holes on the light squares. So after h5 he played e4, which is a pawn sacrifice temporarily, but we will win it back on g5, of course. So nothing wrong, we are a pawn up, and once again we have a rook that is defending and attacking at the same time. Bishop f5, king e3, of course you need to activate the king, bring the king as much as possible. This is an end game. We are threatening c5, because if you look at this position, we have a great rook on g5, we have this very active king on d4, but the bishop is poor on b3. No worries, after having played king d4, we are threatening c5, and once we play c5, our bishop will be happy too. So black prevented c5 by playing e5, but no worries, in this position, we still want to improve the bishop, because it, as I said, when bishop b3 was played, it was an ugly bishop, but it was a very useful bishop. It was preventing rook b2 all the time. But now it has been enough of prevention. The king is on c3, there's no more rook b2 ever. How to improve this bishop? Well, first of all, there's a problem, because this bishop is attacking the a2 pawn. So in order to activate the b3 bishop, we need to do something about the pawn. And that will be just a very tiny little move, a3. Of course on dark square and not a4, because even if the pawn will not drop, just remember that you want to place your pawns. Here we have light squared bishops, so you want to have your pawns on dark squares. That means a lot of mobility to your bishop, and it also means that the opponent cannot attack your pawns. If your pawns are on dark squares, the a3 pawn can never be attacked by the bishop. Rook e7, rook g4 is a great move because it forces matters. Black either has to go passive with rook h7 or he has to push this pawn h3. And here Karpov was not greedy at all. You can capture the pawn, but after g takes h3, it doesn't really matter how many h pawns you have. It's still a double pawn. In this case, is not very useful because it still acts like one pawn. So he played g3 instead. And if this pawn drops later, at some point, well, either with the bishop or with the rook. Imagine that a pawn falls, then he will have two connected passed pawns. That's a lot better than doubled pawns on the h file. g3, rook e8. Of course, Kasparov doesn't want to sit still and wait until he has to resign. He wants to go rook f8 and rook f2. Active counterplay. That's very well done, but still this position is lost. So even if he manages to finally have counterplay, it's too late because the c-pawn marches. Check, check again to make the black king go as far from our pawn as possible. And after rook b2, king a5, of course we are getting closer to our pawn. And rook b8, c7, rook c8, king b6, this position is winning. All you need to do is prevent that black promotes his pawn. If h2, he's not threatening anything actually, because we always have bishop c6, so you can even allow the opponent play h1 queen, and then you win the queen with bishop c6 check, or you play rook h7 immediately and capture the pawn on h2. Maybe that's even more simple. So Kasparov played king e3, and here bishop c6, of course, very useful move if you want to capture the queen on h1. You don't want to allow the promotion. And here g4 is, I think, the last very accurate move, because after h2, it's still possible to make a mistake here with white, because king b2 just looks like, come on, the opponent has to resign. I'm winning the rook. Not exactly. He can go rook h8, and after c8 queen, captures, and now bishop f5, so he will capture the rook, and then he threatens e4, and if he can close the diagonal of the bishop, then h1 is a queen. So suddenly it's like, am I still winning? No, perhaps here white has to find a way to not lose, because if e4 and h1 queen, then he has to resign. Still, of course, he can go something like bishop h1, but we were winning. Why shall we play king b7 and then pray not to lose the game? After h2, g4 is the best move, because if in this position black plays e4, he has just closed the bishop's diagonal, so we have rook h7. And if he plays something else, then what? We are marching with this pawn as well. We always have king b7, and we have this other passed pawn. So Kasparov went rook h8, but after rook d1, of course preventing h1. Yes, we also always threaten c8, but you will see that this is an even more simple way to victory, because after bishop a2, rook e1 check, king f4, rook e4 check, he even grabs the e5 pawn, eliminates this pawn, so there's nothing left for black besides the h2 pawn. And after rook e2, Kasparov resigned, because you have to go bishop b3, for instance, and after rook h2, there are no more pawns left for black, no more tricks. You cannot capture this because c8 queens. Long game, but I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you liked it. It has been 60 moves of brilliancy by Anatoly Karpov, who has just turned 65, the 12th world champion. I love his games. I think we can learn a lot from him in terms of positional play. Remember the prophylactic thinking ideas from this game. Remember how, first of all, we started out with this move, c6. Of course, we want to destroy the opponent's pawn structure. If we have to give up the pawn, let's give it up this way. And then just remember this beautiful rook c1, mysterious but very deep move, and then rook b5, rook a5. This rook b5, rook a5 is something that I'm sure that you can apply in your games if the opponent has a pawn structure like this. So many times when there's not a healthy pawn chain but isolated pawns all around on one flank, you will have rook maneuvers like this. Rook c1 is something more awkward. I have never played a move like this in my games, but rook b5, rook a5, or rook b3, rook a3, depending on where are the pawns, or rook b4, rook a4, rook b4, rook c4. These kind of rook maneuvers are pretty standard, so I'm sure that if you remember this idea that you want to attack the weak pawns and at the same time you want to protect your pawn, then you will find rook maneuvers like this. And many other maneuvers that we have learned from this game, and how to prevent the opponent's ideas, how not to allow him play however he wants. Hope that you like this game. I love it. I have studied so many times already. And remember that you have the prophylactic thinking. Oh my, I just closed the board. That I have said at the beginning of the show that this will be our only session on prophylaxis because I love this topic. I just wanted to teach this game so much to you guys. But there's already a very great video series on prophylactic thinking on Chess24, recorded by Grandmaster Arthur Yusupov with Jan Gustafsson. So make sure that you check out that video series on prophylactic thinking because that will explain you prophylaxis in very much detail, all the depths of prophylaxis, positional play. And as Arthur Yusupov says, he believes that prophylactic thinking is the central theme of positional play. So if you want to improve your positional play, if you want to know how to play in a more strategic way, then you should definitely study that video series because, as you have seen, Karpov was a master of prophylactic thinking, and this is the kind of play that will make your opponent feel like he has lost the game without making a mistake. Because your opponents, even if they don't blunder, but you prevent all the time what they want, but at the same time improve your position, it will mean that they will lose games without understanding where they made a mistake. And I think that when I win a game like that, I feel amazing because it's like, yeah, when the opponent blunders a bishop, that's an easy win. Or when I find some trick in the position, then, oh wow, I tricked him. But when you outplay the opponent simply by thinking in the way Karpov did, that feels amazing. So try to play like this, at least in some games. Even if you're an attacking player, your task for these weeks, the coming weeks, is to play some blitz games and try to play in the way Karpov did. Play Karpov style, prevent the opponent's ideas, and at the same time improve your position. I will say goodbye for now, and I will not see you next week, but we will have other shows. I'm going to Romania tomorrow because the European Women's Championship is starting on Friday, but you will have plenty of chess without me too because the Shamkir tournament starts tomorrow, the Kashimov Memorial on its other name, with Caruana, Giri, and who else is playing? Karyakin is playing there too. I'm messing the names up. Yeah, Caruana, Giri, Karyakin, Huifan, all the Azeri players are there in the Gashimov Memorial starting tomorrow. Also tomorrow, there will be a rapid tournament, the Kurnosov Memorial, with Grishuk playing there and Inarkiev, who has just won the European Championship. And also tomorrow, the Asian Championship will begin with Le Quang Lien, with Kasim Janov, with Wei Yi, all those great Chinese and Asian players. So plenty of chess will be going on these days, starting tomorrow, and on Friday, as I said, the European Women's Championship, where I will be participating too. Cheer for me, please. I hope that I will play some nice Karpovian games. I'll try, at least. And you will, of course, have a lot of shows with Jan Gustafsson, with Sopika Gormishvili. We also have Chess Explained here on Chess24, and I'm sure that Peter Svidal will be back too for some Banter Blitz. Stay tuned for the events, follow our live tournaments, and also remember that you should study prophylactic thinking from Arthur Yusupov here on Chess24, and our new video series with Sopiko on Magnus Carlsen's rise to the top. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you after the European Championship. Bye bye!